Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Oh, do you want me in front of the camera?
I'm going to stand in front of the camera. So, we're simul zooming, so everybody can see me here. It's my pleasure to introduce Kyle Nesson today. Kyle and I, as many of you know, go way back. Kyle came to Cal Poly as a transfer student from Cuesta in 2014. Yeah, I got a picture of baby Kyle here, I think. Let's do this here.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, good. I swear we try this.
Okay. We will find out a way to advance a slide here before this begins.
Yeah, jeez.
Call IT if you want.
Could you?
Yeah.
Man, why does this always happen? Okay, let's see.
He's such a tech guy. This is particularly embarrassing for him. There
you go. Okay, wait, I got to bring the Zoom people back. That's good. I like to hear that. Okay, this is now working.
Okay. So in 2014, he transferred to Cal Poly from Cuesta, and immediately, I think the very first week that you transferred, showed up in my office and started doing research with Jen and I, using cameras to look at plant reproduction and all kinds of different pigments in plants. And I could tell pretty immediately that this is a special guy. He had a weird kind of very deep curiosity about plants, and also wanted to use technology to learn more about plants and wanted to pull all that together in very innovative ways. If you know Kyle, you know he's a tech enthusiast, tech geek, gadgeteer. Technophile. I'm not sure what you call it. Either way, he's a serious early adopter of all these technologies. I remember in 2016 him telling me that Pokemon Go was going to change the world. And I said, by 2018, nobody's going to even know what that is. And we bet on it. Remember that? I think you lost that bet at the time. Yeah. So let's see. In 2018, then Kyle graduated from Cal Poly and from his undergraduate career and went on to work for a local environmental consulting firm, Althouse and Mead. And where his work there, he became sort of their tech guy to look at butterfly groves and how they were working and so on. And Dan Mead was a really important mentor of his. Lindy Althouse is here, and Lindy, thank you, Lindy, for all your support of Kyle during all that time. And then Kyle came back to Cal Poly, and once again couldn't stay away to do his master's, and he let's see, I got another picture of you here. This is typical Kyle right there with holding 5 gadgets, got a drone there, he's on a boat, all that kind of thing. And very, very interested obviously in the tech and how to use that to understand biology better. Over the years, Jen and I and others have taught all kinds of crazy classes in plant biology at the Huntington Botanical Gardens, at the National Tropical Botanical Gardens on Hawaii, and he's been with us as a student or TA during almost all of those classes. I've been accused of only taking graduate students that look like me. And yeah. Kyle and I have laughed a lot about that over the years, and we talked about, we make sure, I was like, what are you going to wear today? Because I'm going to wear something different. I'm not going with the tie and the blue shirt, whatever you do here. So Kyle's thesis, which is wind resilience and overwintering butterflies, has allowed him to do a bunch of combination of his love of plants and technology, and also ecological interactions, and to further understand an important threatened species. Before I go any further too, I also want to give a sincere thanks to Francis Villablanca. Francis is right there. Recently retired from Cal Poly, but whose deep expertise in monarch ecology and his generous collaboration during this whole thing has allowed it to actually happen. And so thank you for all your you're advising Kyle during this whole process. Anyway, I've had many students in my career and here at Cal Poly, and few of them have been as special and as smart and as fun and as long lasting as Kyle. And lucky for me and all of us here, he's not going anywhere. He's going to stay as a Central Coast biologist and resource for all of us. So please join me in welcoming Kyle Nesson.
Just one more baby Kyle photo. One more, yeah. Okay. And everyone, this is Joan. Okay, wow. Thank you, Matt, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for being here. This is a very special moment for me. And for all you Dodger fans, thank you for your sacrifice during the first game of the World Series. Yeah. So today I want to talk to you about what I've been up to the last 2 years, studying wind resilience in monarch butterflies. And so biotic and abiotic, oh, Jesus. There we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to the whiteboard, here we go. Oh my God.
We're trying to get an interpretive dance out. No talk, yes.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that from there.
Should I do it? Something about butterflies. Let's see. Okay, we're gonna do this all over again. Man, this is gonna be difficult. Like, I am kind of fidgety. Okay, is the Zoom good? Zoom's not good. Okay.
Trying to do a lot of hard things here all at once. You're doing great.
Yeah, we're doing it. We're doing it. Okay, I think that's good. Okay, great. Okay, so biotic and abiotic factors limit the distribution and survival of organisms. So those biotic conditions are those between different organisms. These are things like predation, competition, parasitism. But the abiotic factors, those set by the environment, often determine where and what organisms can occur. So things like temperature, freezing conditions will exclude many organisms from persisting in one place year to year. Humidity, like water availability in general. If you imagine like a banana slug in the desert, you can like get the idea that this is a limiting factor for many things, particularly invertebrate species like butterflies, that these ectotherms are especially sensitive to these abiotic conditions. Solar radiation, the amount of sunlight these organisms can absorb, will often determine the behavior of these organisms. So things like avoiding sun if they're too hot, but also using sunlight to warm themselves up is a really adaptive strategy. And finally, wind is this often understudied but important abiotic factor in determining the behavior of many, particularly invertebrate species. So one example is cockroaches. So when researchers, when researchers put these cockroaches in laboratory conditions and no wind, you can see these like looping patterns here. They'll move to a spot, kind of meander around, look for food, move to a new spot. But as they increase the wind speed up to here, that looping foraging behavior moves into these directed, motivated movements, presumably to get out of the wind, which is something I'm sure we could all relate to. These darkling beetles in the Namibian desert, they spend most of their day under the sand, hiding from solar radiation and predators. But when wind speeds get of a certain speed, above 8 meters per second, they will actually emerge from the sand. They'll show up on the surface. And what they're doing is foraging because that sand is the wind is moving that sand, exposing detritus and creating better foraging conditions for them. And then finally, spiders do this behavior called ballooning. So this spider here is sending out some silk, and in a minute here, it's going to blow away. And so what they're doing here is they're sensing the environment with their abdomen, their like butt area, and the conditions are right, like warm temperatures, moderate wind speeds, they will create a balloon with their silk and hopefully land in greener pastures. Now, monarch butterflies are this excellent system for understanding or studying how abiotic conditions affect invertebrate species. This is an iconic butterfly found across all of North America and does this really amazing thing, which is its annual migration. So I want to walk you through this this journey of butterflies that can travel thousands of miles to these overwintering groves, congregate in huge numbers, and inspire biologists and people in general. So let me orient you. This is the entire range of the North American butterfly. This yellow polygon is its breeding range. So this is where they'll spend their spring and summer. And then in the wintertime, they'll come to these overwintering groves. I've like really exaggerated these areas for the figure. These are actually very small mountain regions in central Mexico and along the coast of most of California here. So what I want to do is follow two butterflies. We have two recognized populations in the United States. We have the western population and the eastern. They're divided by the Rocky Mountains. And these butterflies have been born in late fall. So it's like September for them. And they're going to begin this southern migration where the western butterflies will make their way to the coast of California. And these northern butterflies will fly thousands of miles. This individual will fly thousands of miles to these overwintering groves in Mexico. They arrive there, and what they're primarily doing is escaping these abiotic conditions. So much of North America will freeze over. Butterflies cannot tolerate this for like any reasonable amount of time. They can't persist in like Minnesota year round. They have to like fly down like a snowbird, you know, like people will often land in Florida, you know, and they will stay there and try to persist through the winter months, you know, many months until springtime comes around where they will re-migrate back into these breeding grounds. They're looking for this plant here, which is milkweed. And it gets its name because of this milky white latex. The plant produces this latex as a form of protection. There's a family of chemicals called cardanoids. It's really quite toxic to anything that might want to eat it, at least make them very sick. There's a really fun study I don't have time to get into, but the butterflies have not only been able to adapt a way to tolerate these chemicals, but actually sequester them and hold them in their body, thus like borrowing or stealing that protection for themselves. Okay, so these butterflies have made it into the breeding ground. They found milkweed. And what they're doing now is they're just going to reproduce as quickly as possible. These butterflies are living only 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the temperature, until they've completely saturated North America. They're multiplying their numbers by many, many orders of magnitude. Each female can lay up to hundreds of eggs in a given lifespan. So each generation, we could get much bigger numbers. And this expansion happens over 4 to 5 of these generations. And now we're back in fall. And just for simplicity, I've like cleaned it up a little bit, but we have these butterflies that are much bigger. So there's 3 things that are happening. The days are getting shorter, the temperatures are getting colder, and milkweed across North America is starting to senesce, or like the quality is dying. And in the wintertime, all of the milkweed will die back. It just completely disappears from the landscape. It's like critical resource for the reproduction. And this triggers a single hormone in the monarchs that are born during this time, causing them to grow much larger and live a lot longer. So again, the breeding butterflies, that's what these ones that did that big radiation, they only live 2 to 6 weeks, but our super monarchs, we call them, live 6 to 9 months. So if you imagine like a human is a breeding butterfly, like 5'10", lives to be 80, and then their great-grandchildren, like all of a sudden is 10 feet tall and lives to be 1,000 years old. It's like this like really weird thing that butterflies do. And again, this is so that these butterflies can make it back to these overwintering groves. They're like holding this little flame of this annual migration with them in these overwintering sites. They like take this flame with them, they wait it out so that they can restart the migration the next year. We can actually see this in data. So this is iNaturalist observations during the 2023 migration. Each one of those dots is a monarch observation, and the green is showing NDVI. This is like the greenness from satellite imagery. So you can see this pulse, like as summer progresses, these butterflies flood North America, and then as the vegetation dies back, they collapse down into these overwintering sites. And again, some of them get stuck in Florida. Okay, so these overwintering groves is where we see like the most impressive examples of these butterflies. You can have hundreds of millions of them in a very small area, like just think like hundreds of acres and not like hundreds of miles. And again, what they're doing is they're escaping those cold, stormy conditions or those unfavorable, whatever, you know, and they are restrained by their energy. So once they arrive to these overwintering sites, they no longer really have an ability to feed or create any more lipid energy. They have to bring all of their gas with them, and they have to survive those many months. And so there is, because they're ectotherms, they're very sensitive to their body temperature and how quickly they use that energy. So this graph here, thoracic body temperature is just body temperature, and this is their rate of energy use. And at low temperatures, they're actually like very efficient. They're just like sipping on that gas. But if they get warmer, like just their use becomes much higher, and it like increases. So the difference between 25 to 30 is more than double, but 5 to 10 is like barely a difference. And so they're incentivized to like really manage their body temperature. And because they can't do it internally, they have to use behavior. And so what I'm showing here is a great study that describes a number of different behaviors in these monarchs that either will seek sun or seek shade to manage that energy use. And I want to draw your attention to this line here. This is the flight threshold. So if butterflies are too cold, they're below that, they're unable to actually like muster the energy to begin flying. And so they have to do one of two things. Like hopefully they have sunlight available to them, like these butterflies, where they're open and they can absorb that solar radiation and warm up in a matter of minutes. So actually like very efficient at getting up to that flight threshold. Or they have to do something extreme, which is shiver. They make these like small little wing beats, and that can do it. But this is kind of an emergency deal because it uses 30 times as much energy as just opening your wings and being able to fly away. So in the eastern population, all these butterflies go to the mountains of Mexico. They can be found in hundreds of millions, like I showed here. And this is an aerial photo of the grove. They are in these fir forests. And that orange haze there is all the butterflies congregated in one spot. So you can actually see them from the air, like in an airplane. It's really remarkable. But in the West, we have a different situation where we have a number of smaller groves that are very coastal. They just hug the coast like that. And historically, they were in Monterey pine forests, but through kind of an accident of history, we planted a bunch of eucalyptus trees across our landscape in the late 1800s and 1900s. And so we've created, again, like by accident, a ton of habitat that monarchs seem to really like. Over 75% of these butterflies occur on eucalyptus groves. And this one right here is like very typical. This is Pismo monarch grove. This is like one of our most important sites in California, routinely in the top 10. And you can see that has dominated by these trees that are 150 feet tall, immediately coastal. And these groves are often nestled in urban areas and pretty small. So it's like 12-acre area. You can do a lap in pretty quick. So here at Cal Poly in the 90s, a number of researchers, primarily led by Kingston Leong, started to get interested in these groves. Like they wanted to know, why do these butterflies keep coming to these same groves year after year? And beyond that, like they come to the same branches, so much so that at Pismo, we can make these trails and we can plan viewing areas because these butterflies are so reliable, even though they're separated by 4 generations. And so what is that about? That's what these researchers were trying to understand. And so what they came up with was what we now call the microclimate hypothesis. They thought that it was a series of abiotic conditions that were just right that the butterflies were selecting for. They are mild temperatures for like all the reasons that we've discussed. You can't get too hot, but you certainly don't want to freeze. High humidity, so our coastal weather, like our marine fog, is really good for these butterflies. We don't have a lot of surface water available, so this prevents desiccation. Dappled light, again, like having the opportunity to absorb that energy instead of like shivering is advantageous for them. And then critically, they pose that wind protection was this primary function of these overwintering groves. So our strongest storms are winter storms. If you're a little butterfly, it stands to reason that you want to get out of these extreme events because it could impact your survival. The problem, though, is that Kingston Leong did not study the effects of wind on monarchs directly. So what he did was he went to a few sites. Montana de Oro is one of them. And he tracked trees that butterflies use and those that he didn't use. And he took a series of short measurements, like about 10-second wind measurements at the base of these things, and compared those wind speeds. And it's worth noting that in his original study, it's 1991, his maximum observed wind speed at a non-clustering tree was 3.5 miles per hour, or 1.6 meters per second. But in his career, he never measured how monarchs respond to wind in a direct way. And so during that 1990 study, he makes this observation that during these winter storms, butterflies cluster on trees that offer the greatest protection against winds of 2 meters per second or greater. That's 5 miles per hour. But over the 26 years that he worked in monarch butterflies, it became this best practice where he states, he asserts quite strongly that winds greater to or equal than 2 meters per second are disruptive to aggregating butterflies by blowing them from the roost or shaking them from their branches. And his ideas were very influential. So every credible and reputable management plan about managing overwintering groves, particularly in the West, draws heavily from his ideas. And wind became a really important thing that we manage for. So much so that when I worked at Althouse and Mead, I had the opportunity to develop some new methods to assess the function of overwintering habitat by reconstructing these groves in the computer and subjecting them to like digital storms, and then testing like how does our restoration plan work compared to existing conditions. That's what we're showing here. So lots of blue means we're good. And that directly informed the density and location of trees that we planted like on the ground right now. The problem though is that when other researchers tried to reproduce these microclimate results, they were unable to do so. Saini and Villablanca in 2022 tested this hypothesis more directly. They looked at more groves, so from Morro Bay down to Ventura, and they took a more systematic approach. Instead of just a few observations here and there, they deployed equipment throughout the overwintering season at the location of the butterflies and systematically within the interior and the exterior. And what they found was they actually couldn't see any difference between temperature, light, and humidity. Maybe light. In this part of the grove, southeast edge did look a little different because it's getting so much of that sun. And more importantly, that all of these sites look different from each other. So within a grove, we couldn't detect this microclimate, but across groves, the microclimate looks different. And the problem, or not the problem, but they weren't able to measure the effects of wind directly in this study. And so what I did and what we did is really just built on this work and trying to understand how does wind affect monarch butterflies. And so our objective was to evaluate this 2 meter per second wind threshold that's been used in overwintering management for the last 30 years. So here are my hypotheses. The first is that wind is disruptive to overwintering butterflies at 2 meters per second, like the conventional wisdom. And our prediction is that monarch abundance will decline, experiencing wind speeds at this 2 meter per second or greater. Wind speeds predict butterfly abundance at overwintering clusters. And so those groves that experience higher wind speeds, that we'll see decreases in that abundance, and it scales with the intensity. So faster winds, more decrease. Third, disruptive winds influence future roost selection. So if butterflies experience these strong winds, we would expect them to return less often to these sites or not at all. And then finally, that the disruptive wind hypothesis may be too simple and we need to consider other environmental factors. And our prediction there is that considering these various different things like temperature, light, and solar radiation, we should see various changes. So how do we do this? We used remote monitoring equipment. So we took a modified camera to see in near infrared light. If you've tried taking pictures of butterflies, it's very difficult with a normal camera. So we just modified a little bit to enhance the contrast. Clusters show up as these dark blobs in the image, and the vegetation appears quite bright. And we also track the wind speed. So we would take a picture like every 30 minutes, track all the wind in between, and we put them on these poles, these like 50-foot poles to the height of the cluster, and got them as close as we could so that hopefully we were be able to observe the clusters and also experience the same conditions that they were, or be able to track it. And we did all this work at Vandenberg Space Force Base, which I will show you here in a second. So here's the equipment at my primary site. We have the camera here and our wind meter and a cluster of butterflies that's on these freestanding poles that are primarily used for like ham radio. and it takes photos like this. And just to give you a sense of scale, here's my research assistant, Skylar, helping me out in the field. And this was one of our larger poles at like 35 feet. And we set up a lot of these poles. So we did this throughout Vandenberg Space Force Base. We did a few up here at North Base. Here in the southern part, there's Skylar again. UDMH, which was produced some of our data. And then Spring Canyon, me with one of my poles. And not all of our poles made it. We had quite a few fall. So we deployed this equipment over 2 seasons. Our first one from mid-November to early February, we looked at 4 different sites and 18 different deployments. That's what I just call one pole observing a bunch of clusters. And it was very opportunistic in our strategy. We'd go out, find clusters, put a camera on there. Sometimes we tried to anticipate where butterflies would be, and that didn't really work. And then the second year, we got the full overwintering season, pretty much mid-October to mid-March. And with all of our lessons learned, all of this experience under our belts, went out, put equipment out at 10 different sites with the idea of modifying that as we saw more butterflies. But we got hampered. So like last year was the second lowest year ever for monarch butterflies. There was 9,000 across the state and like basically none at Vandenberg. So I have many thousands of pictures of just like blue gums blown around from that year, not doing a whole lot for me. So basically the consequence of that is all our data came from our first season and primarily one of 2 sites. This is Spring Canyon, and these are all of the different deployment locations. So once we had all these photos, how do we convert them into a number that we can do some statistics with? Well, we developed this custom software to count the butterflies. The idea here was to take a photo, divide it into a number of cells, and then to categorize each cell to determine, one, if it has butterflies in it, and then if it does, what is the order of magnitude? So is it less than 10 butterflies? Is it several dozens butterflies? Or is it more than 100? These are all my awesome photo labelers, my undergraduate assistants that did all this work and really made this research possible. They like to joke that they were just doing a bunch of CAPTCHAs, and so I'm very grateful for their efforts. So once we had the images labeled, how do we turn that into a number? Well, we count up the number of categories of each. And then, oh, there's Kevin, one of our labelers. Yeah. I don't want to interrupt. No, Kevin, I just gave you a shout out, Kevin. Okay. And so once we had all our categories, we added them up and we took the most conservative estimate. So of the range, we took the lowest number, and that gave us not a true count, but like a nice conservative way to compare changes across all of our deployments. And while we were doing this, we discovered that direct sunlight seems to be this important factor in changing butterfly count. So if we look at, here's our cluster here. Oh, we lost. Okay, there's a big cluster. It's going to pass through. And then once that morning light is gone, there's less butterflies. And part of the reason we needed photo labelers was because this is a total pain in the butt. And so I'm sure like they can attest to that. And so being able to track, what was there a butterfly there? Like, are these white pixels like mostly the shape of a butterfly? Yeah, that took some skill. Okay, and so we counted these butterflies in the same way, but any cell that had a count in it, we then just asked, are these butterflies experiencing direct sunlight? And if they were, we'd put a little yellow box around it and count those separately. So this image has about 150 butterflies total, but of those, only 17 are in sunlight. Okay, so for our analytical approach, we considered 2 temporal windows. The first is this 30-minute window. This is the maximum resolution that we could measure in our study. So like, it's like, think of it as the immediate response. Like butterflies are at this count, they experience some conditions. How does that change? But we also wanted to give the butterflies some time to respond or allow conditions to accumulate. And so we would take the maximum count on one given day, allow it to go overnight, and then see how they change at that sunset. We did linear regressions for both of these temporal windows, asking directly, does wind speed predict changes in butterflies? And then we did this microhabitat modeling. And so this was, more statistically involved and allowed us to control for different study design principles and incorporate other environmental factors. And we built a bunch of models and compared them via AIC. So our response variable is a change in butterflies. And so for either the 30-minute or the next day sunset analysis, we would ask, okay, how many butterflies are there at the beginning of that period? How many are at the end? And we would subtract this number from this number to get a single value that had directionality to it. So if butterflies decreased, it would be negative. If they increase, it should be a positive value. This is another figure to help you visualize our different response times. So we only labeled photos of butterflies during the day. That's what each one of these little black dots are. And among them, like each one of these comparisons is a 30-minute window. So we generated a ton of these immediate response data points. We have far fewer of the next day because we only observed so many days. So we had this variable start time because the maximum count varied across the day. And we would say, like, for this, we would start it here, allow it to go overnight, and then ask how it compares to that one. So for our results, with the linear regression in our 30-minute analysis, we found no relationship with wind. We had a lot of observations, almost 1,900, and you're equally likely to see an increase or a decrease, but almost all of them occurred around 0. That's what this line is here. That's the prediction. And note that this 2 meter per second threshold is right here with the vast majority of observations happening right here or above that. We experienced winds more than 6 times that threshold and still saw no change in butterflies. The same was true for the next day response. So given like more than 24 hours to respond, these butterflies, I know this line looks like it's going up, but the p-value is quite large. And so just think of it as a straight line, equally likely to go up or down. But like critically, what's important to note here is that there are no observations below this 2 meter per second threshold. So every day that we observe butterflies in a durable, persistent way, they were experiencing winds greater than what was originally predicted to cause them to leave their sites. For our microhabitat modeling, I'm going to start with the next day. There's a lot of text here. I'm just going to go through a few things we did. You know, if you want to grill me on the stats, I'm happy to have you grill me on it. I just want to draw your attention to the predictors. So we have this maximum wind speed, minimum temperature, maximum temperature, temperature at the beginning of the window, and how many butterflies experience sunlight. And then we have this control variable, like how many butterflies at the start. So controlling for cluster size. We did some like correlational analyses, and these were all not really correlated with each other, and we thought might be explanatory in this analysis. We had a best model. We had a distinct, like well-supported best model with this single interaction. And I know this is like a complicated figure, so I brought a prop to help explain. So this is the same, this is the surface of that right there. So because we have, I know, I didn't make this, yeah. So because we're not just asking how one variable affects our response variable, which we just saw, we have 2 of them. I'm like using my y-axis on another environmental variable. So we have to go into the z-axis. So when this dimension comes up, that's a positive increase in butterflies, this red area. And these dips here, this blue, that's correlated with a decrease in butterflies. So if I were to walk over here to about 5 meters per second and go to some moderate amount of wind, I would expect butterflies to actually increase during these conditions. And this figure here doesn't look quite like that because computers are very happy to draw these nice smooth curves, and you can interpret them like incorrectly. And the actual figure here, a lot of it's gray because we have no observations in that space. And so we don't want to show you that, right? Because we don't have any evidence to support it necessarily. And in general, like we should be careful about looking too far into these areas. Like these spots here are being informed by like a single day, a single observation. We have much more support here where the majority of our data is. And so what does this analysis say? We had actually like pretty good fit in our squared value of more or less 0.4. And we can see when we hold butterflies in shade, right? So these are butterflies experienced light. Down here, they never experienced it. there is like maybe a slight decrease, but it's a pretty weak one. But as soon as you add a little bit of light, you have this huge like band here where butterflies are actually seem to be coming from other parts of the grove and like roosting there, like actually selecting it. And if we keep wind speeds low, we have this really deep, let me show you, since I got the model, like it's really deep valley here where these butterflies seem to be avoiding areas where it's like calm conditions, but really sunny. Okay. Is the prop helpful? Yeah. We also did this for the 30-minute analysis. The main difference here is we use slightly different predictors, just the maximum wind speed, average temperature, and time of day. And we see like a similar result where the overwhelming majority of our observations are butterflies in shade. That was actually seeing butterflies in sun was kind of rare for our study, over 85% of our observations. And again, like really no effect, like this color is very close to zero, but you get this like complex interaction. Like some conditions, the butterflies will increase, and other conditions, they will decrease. For this analysis in particular, I want to caution like looking too much into it. Our R-squared value is quite low, and these big colorful areas in my graph are very sparse with data. But there it is. You know, I think this is the most like compelling result right there. Anything else? Okay. This best model also had a few other predictors, which I think are interesting. Time of day emerged as a significant effect. And so the way to interpret this graph is you hold all of these things constant except time of day, and you ask like, doesn't matter what wind's doing, doesn't matter what temperature's doing, is time of day predictive? And it actually is. So in the morning, they seem to leave their roost, and then sometime in the afternoon, they reform and settle. And this agrees with anecdotal observations, like people in the field, and so much so that we write into our protocols that you can't survey past a certain time because those butterflies will leave and it'll skew your count. And then temperature also emerged where the line is like relatively flat up until this blue band. That's the flight threshold that I talked about. And beyond that flight threshold, it seems like they're maybe selecting for certain temperature ranges. And then beyond 25C, they're escaping or avoiding those areas. And finally, to test this 2 meter per second threshold more directly, we swapped maximum wind speed with minutes above 2 meters per second for our 30-minute analysis. This model didn't have a nice, clean, decisive best model. That's why I'm showing you two here. And overall, it performed worse. It's worth noting that the second best model, which shares 40% of the weight, doesn't include wind at all. But I want to show you the interaction all the same, where when you hold butterflies in shade, when we basically reduce the effect of sunlight, we're not seeing any effect. If anything, a hint of them increasing. Okay, so that was a lot of graphs. I want to show you some videos, which is a nice feature of my project. This is a condition where we have low wind but high sun, and the clusters are right here. And so when the morning comes, we'll see that morning light come through, and afterwards they are basically gone. They started much larger and then also got knocked down the day before. And we can also see high wind, low sun. So all of the clusters are up here in the canopy. Pretty soon at night, they're going to get blown around pretty good. And by the time the morning comes, any moment, we see that many of those clusters still persist and are still experiencing strong winds. I didn't explain this. This is the direction and strength of wind, and this inner dashed line is that 2 meter per second threshold. And then finally, here's our highest wind with low sun. Here's our cluster right there. At night, they have a terrible time. You know, yeah, absolutely terrible time. By the time the morning comes, we did lose some butterflies. They're still there, but by the end of the day, they reform. So they were not discouraged after that storm. Okay, so before I get into the conclusions, I just want to acknowledge some limitations of my study. The biggest one being that I only have 1 year of data, and primarily from one spot. So this photo here, I'm within like throwing distance of basically all the data that I collected during the study. So we should be cautious about overgeneralizing these results to like all groves, because monarch groves can be quite diverse, but all the same. And then we had low explanatory power, in our 30-minute analysis. I think there's several reasons for that, but one of them might be our counting methodology. So we did that threshold, like order of magnitude to save time. You know, we had to go through tens of thousands of photos to do this. And it might be that at that frequency, it's just too close, right? Like you might need like a more finer signal to make that work. And then finally, our populations are much lower than they were when Kingston Leong was doing his work. So at our peak during 2023, there was 3,000 butterflies at Spring Canyon, and it would not be uncommon or hard for Kingston Leong to find groves with like 30,000 or more. And so when butterflies get in large clusters, they will grab onto each other, and that may make their attachment points weaker. And maybe that's why he observed things that we didn't in our study. Okay, so how do we do? For hypothesis 1, wind is disruptive at overwintering groves above 2 meters per second. This is not supported. None of our statistical analyses showed any meaningful threshold or that wind alone is predictive. Wind speeds predict abundance of overwintering groves. So this is the intensity and scale. And again, not supported. When we hold light on its own, we like reduce the effects of, when we hold wind on its own and reduce the effects of light, we don't see any strong directionality. They generally don't seem to change one way or the other. Third, our disruptive winds influence future roost selection. This was not supported. We actually found like a counterintuitive result where under certain windy conditions and light, they actually seem to be potentially selecting for it or like moving into those groves. So definitely did not predict a negative change. And then finally, disruptive wind is too simplistic and we need other environmental factors. This we did support, showing that there appears to be an interaction between sunlight and wind. Okay, so if it's not just wind alone, what's going on? My study can't say that, but I think it does point to thermal regulation as this alternative example. So monarch butterflies, as we've established, are sensitive to temperature, and sunlight can be this force that they use to moderate their temperature. And maybe wind is also one of those things. So in sunny conditions with strong breeze, like you just imagine like working outside with the wind and without the wind, you know, and you can picture what I'm getting at. And so this photo here is showing sort of like a simple model of how heat exchange works, where we have solar radiation coming in, there's this radiative heat transfer going in and out, and then this convective cooling that would be supplied by the wind. And I'm throwing this photo in because it's fun, but also to show you that butterflies have really like advanced structures in the wind for not only absorbing temperatures, but radiating it away. So they've been thinking about it for a while. And also what I think our study shows is that light is the strong, stable signal for monarch butterflies at overwintering groves. If you think about it, you know, it takes like all of our cleverness as a species and all of our computers to try to predict wind, you know, for the next week. And we're like only have so much success. But light is this really predictable, stable signal in the environment where you could calculate, you know, the position of the sun 3,000 years from now with a small phone. And we know from monarchs that they use the position of the sun and the time of day to orient themselves south. So the hardware's there, they have like great eyes, like they have precedent for the software, quote unquote. And previous studies like this figure adapted from Stu in 91, there's some evidence to point that maybe light is more selective. So this permanent category, those are locations within a grove where butterflies use it throughout the entire season. If you note, there's like this very narrow range of the percent open sky at those different sites. Transient is like a more moderate marginal habitat where butterflies use it part of the year. That range increases, and then this unoccupied former sites, it's even more so. So I think I would encourage future researchers to explore light as maybe this alternative, like critical abiotic factor that butterflies are selecting for. And so for conservation implications, I think we need to reconsider management around strict wind thresholds. If anything, I hope my study has shown you that butterflies can tolerate much stronger winds than we originally gave them credit for. But the good news is that what we're doing now, I think, is still correct. Continuing to manage groves for longevity and health is still a great idea. it's clear that monarch butterflies rely on these large trees, and it takes a long time to grow a tree. And so anything we can do to preserve that habitat, I think, is a good idea. And also replanting for future generations, because there's no amount of money you can spend to make a tree grow faster. And then finally, if managing for light proves to be this effective strategy, I think this opens up interesting opportunities for habitat design. And I'm showing this photo here in Los Osos, Monarch Lane, as an example of that. So this is actually Kingston Leong's project, to give him some credit. And he took an existing grove of eucalyptus trees, cut a hole in it with the idea of managing for light. And people thought that was like kind of a crazy idea at the time, because that would reduce wind protection. But he actually created new habitat. Like this was a declining site. And now butterflies routinely use this on a fairly regular basis. And when I took this photo, the neighbor who was walking his dog was like very eager to tell me all the amazing butterflies he's seen in this grove in the past. And so if wind buffers are not as critical as we once thought, we may have this excess of eucalyptus groves, and by punching a few holes in them, that could create new habitat. But it's a speculative idea, but one that I think we should think about. And this is coming at a critical time because overwintering sites across the state are in decline. This is a photo from Elwood, where they had thousands of trees die back in the 2016 drought. And this photo here is from Spring Canyon during my study, actually. So I ended in February because there was this like catastrophic canopy change. We had this terrible storm and knocked down a lot of the trees, and it still remains to be seen how that will affect clusters going into the future. And monarchs in general are in decline. So in the early 90s, it was common to have butterflies in the low millions. And now we're excited to have it above 200,000. And we occasionally have them less than 10,000. So 2020, we only had 2,000 butterflies across the whole state. 2024, 9,000. And so trying to understand and conserve for these overwintering sites, again, like this is where these butterflies are holding this flame warm through the winter months so that they can like restart that fire in the spring to continue the annual migration. So in conclusion, our study does not support this 2 meter per second threshold that's been widely used in conservation. We think thermoregulation is a better model for thinking of monarch movement within the grove. Our results point to light as this new potential critical abiotic factor in overwintering groves. And science-based management practices are more important than ever. So with that, I want to acknowledge a bunch of different people, my funding sources, Xerces Society, USGS, Urban Forestry Institute, and the native chapter of CNPS. My committee, of course, Matt Ritter, Jen Yost, and Francis. A lot of people made this project possible. Our like super study group, Emma, Ashley, Sarah, Peter, Jay, Jessica, Stephanie, Karis, Ray, and Lindy. Many of those people are here today. Thank you for coming. My friends and family for supporting me during this wonderful adventure, especially my wife, Emily. Thank you for making this possible. My undergraduate assistants for all your help in making this research. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. And in memory of Dan Mead. I don't know why I'm doing this. Yeah, he was a mentor to me when I was at Altasa Mead, and directly responsible for my involvement in Monarch. So thank you. Thank you. Water. Yeah, thanks. Lindy.
I would like to personally thank all of you for coming and for believing in Kyle. You were here, and my husband Dan gave Kyle that time.
Yeah.
Dan was amazing in his understanding of the science and the butterflies and the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, that he watched over the years and was invited to speak about them in Washington, D.C. and really help build what we needed to be motivated to protect our pollinators writ large. This work, Kyle, has really done an excellent job of defending Dan's hypothesis that this effect of what he called the cathedral, and he wasn't religious, but he called it the cathedral effect, has to do with the dappled sunlight. And you're getting there. We haven't measured the lux, We haven't measured all those factors that change where the butterflies are vertically. But this concept of poking holes, I love that. I haven't heard it like that before. In eucalyptus scrubs, we can use this as part of our fire fuel management moving forward. So thank you, Kyle.
Nice, thank you. All right. Yeah.
Mostly, but I'm just curious, like, is the newer kind of conclusion, if you were to redo the study, you focus on kind of like them using the sunlight in thermal regulation, like obviously the wind doesn't seem like a deterring factor, but the sun sometimes does. Do you think that ultimately it's like boiling down to the thermal regulation like abilities?
Yeah, like if you were to ask me what I want to do next, it would be this. Yeah, I know, I tried. Yeah, so the figure I showed from Stu, he used hemispherical photos, which is the example on the left there. And it lets you like really efficiently measure how much open sky there is. And at the time, when Stu did his work, you're kind of limited to the ground. Stu is like an interesting guy where he like convinced people to let him take forklifts into the grove so he can get to the height of them. But now we don't have to, thanks to like influencers and stuff. We have these 360 cameras we put on drones. And in the off season, I would love to go to as many sites as possible and measure, like take a photo like that at known sites and non-known sites and see very much like Saini and Villablanca did with the microclimate, go bigger, right? Like see a bunch of different sites, see if this pattern emerges. Because if you ask me, I think what the monarchs might be keying in on is there's this dapple, I'm going to show you that too, because I got a bunch of slides. Here's from Pismo that I took last year, and like this light kind of just like washes over them, but it's never like full sun. It's like it's this dappled light idea that Lindy's talking about, where they have little bursts of this energy. And I think you can see that from the canopy itself. So I didn't really quite mention this, but how do butterflies keep landing on the same groves and the same branches year after year? Well, trees don't move that fast, right? Like it takes them many decades to grow. And so the pattern of light at a given spot is probably very stable year to year. And if they have the eyes and the hardware, and it's probably pretty simple to calculate for them, they might be keying in on that. So if anyone wants to like enable me to like go fly my drone, I would love to do that. Okay, thanks for that question. Yeah.
Really interesting talk, Kyle. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'm wondering if, right, when Kingston made the original observations, right, and thought he saw evidence for this 2 meters per second threshold, right?
Right.
First of all, his measurements were down at the bottom, right?
Yes.
So it seems like 2 meters per second at the bottom probably is much windier at the top, right? Like there is, so
yeah.
It's not really 2 meters, like his threshold wasn't even 2 meters per second for where the butterflies are, right? Because they were higher than where he was standing.
That's true.
Okay. So
yeah.
I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think it might be possible that he saw evidence for what he interpreted as a wind threshold that was in fact really a light threshold? Like if you went back and analyzed, is the spacing of trees that gets you the 2 meters per second that all these managers have been aiming for, maybe that accidentally ended up getting them the right level of dappled light. Like if you went in and compared different sites for the wind, that threshold of wind and the light, maybe there's a relationship. Like there's a reason that Kingston saw that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like totally agree. I think you can be correct for the wrong reasons, I think is the answer there. And I think that's kind of what we've been doing this whole time is we've been managing for this wind, and the way we deal with wind is by planting trees and managing for trees. And so, yeah, I guess I can totally agree. What more useful thing can I say than that? Yeah, like there is this proxy, and I've heard that idea, like he's measuring from the ground. It serves as a proxy for different things, and we don't know. Yeah.
Is the massive decline in butterflies that you showed due to mismanagement?
I don't think we know that. And would be hesitant to say yes. I think pesticides and degradation of the breeding habitat in general is probably a bigger factor. In fact, I would argue the other point where based on my results, I think there's actually a lot more available overwintering habitat that's available, but it's not being expressed because the butterfly counts are so low. There's all this like vacancy within the groves.
So they're getting hit earlier in the year.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like extreme weather events, like the 2020 year, we suspect the fires had a lot to do with that. Getting smoked out. It's not going to help you as a butterfly, probably.
Any last questions for Kyle before we thank him one more time?
Oh, one more.
One more here.
It's gonna be slightly long.
Okay.
Do you know how many, like, compared to the breeding morphs, how many of the migratory morphs are born typically? Is it like a lot less than each successive wave of breeding morphs, or is it about the same?
I don't know. I would say like proportional. I would say like maybe a quarter of them, but that doesn't quite work either. What I will say is like there are these like rapid succession generations in the springtime, and then so like every fourth generation you get this super cluster, and so it really depends on the year, right? Like how well that breeding season went. Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, let's thank Kyle.
Oh, sorry. All right. Thanks, everyone.
And we'll give you a couple minutes to clear out the room when the committee is going to have to meet and talk with Kyle a little bit.
And we're having like an after party at Jen's.
Oh yeah, there's an announcement for the after party there.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.